Bolivia's President Luis Arce arrived in Mexico to pay an official presidential visit. Cuban health authorities announced that mass vaccination against COVID-19 is scheduled to begin in June. In Myanmar, over 600 detained protesters after last month's military takeover were released. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. On Wednesday, Bolivia's President Luis Arce arrived in Mexico to pay an official presidential visit and to comply with the formal invitation from President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. According to Arce's Twitter account recent post, the presidential visit's agenda includes several topics such as the pandemic, scientific technical cooperation, trade, investment, consular cooperation, facilities for Bolivian citizens, foreign debt relief, and the importance of Caribbean and Latin American state community for the integration of the region. On March 25th, the Bolivian head of state is invited to participate in the Day of the Victory of Chacán Putum in the municipality of Champotan, Campeche, an important event that pays homage to the indigenous peoples of Mexico.
President Arce is our friend, our comrade, our brother. He is the result of a popular and democratic indigenous movement in Bolivia that proved a new way of ruling, always in favor of the people, especially the poor, the outcasts.
La mayoría de estas mujeres iniciaron un nuevo modo de oponerse y denunciar al terrorismo. El gobierno que encabezan el presidente Alberto Fernández y la vicepresidenta Cristina Fernández de Kirchner tiene un compromiso irrenunciable con el proceso de memoria, verdad.
And we continue. Cuba's Foreign Affairs Ministry announced that the Caribbean island and the European Union will hold the third dialogue on coercive measures on March 25th. The forum will debate the imposition of unilateral coercive measures and their political and economic impact on several nations. Both sides will also analyze the legal and practical frameworks of the legislation in force in the European Union to counter the enforcement of extraterritorial laws imposed by third countries, such as the Helms-Burton Act, which with the United States has reinforced its blockade against Cuba and threatens European interest. According to the Foreign Ministry, the Cuban delegation will denounce the tightening on the U.S. blockade in the context of the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. This debate will occur amidst tension between the regional bloc and the island after the head of the European diplomacy, Josep Borrell, called on his ambassador to Cuba, Alberto Navarro, after he signed a letter to U.S. President Joe Biden asking to lift the embargo imposed on the island. The president of Argentina, Alberto Fernández, participated in an event to honor the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo this Tuesday as part of the upcoming 45th anniversary of the human rights movement. The Argentine head of state led the ceremony from the Bicentennial Museum of the Presidential Palace, where he paid tribute to the mothers of Plaza de Mayo, who gathered virtually from different parts of the country. 40 mothers and grandmothers of the association were awarded by the president with the Juana Zurduy Prize for their tireless efforts in defense of the human rights and to seek justice for the crimes against humanity committed by the military dictatorship that seized power on March 24, 1976.
Sometimes I wonder whether we will have to keep teaching our youth, because many of them do not understand. Thank God, we have been fighting for 45 years after that terrible coup, and there have been many years of democracy after that. Young people do not understand how scary and depraved the violence has been.
In Bolivia, a massive mobilization of farmers, rural residents, and other social movements demanded justice for the victims of the 2019 coup and the de facto regime presided by Janine Áñez for almost a year. Our correspondent, Freddy Morales, brings us more details.
Thousands of people marched in Bolivia following a call to mobilize by leaders of social movements to demand justice following the November 2019 coup and the violence of almost a year of the de facto rule.
At this moment, the OAS continues with its shady dealings in the case of the coup in Bolivia. This is what we Bolivians do not want. We demand justice for the events that occurred under the 2019 administrations.
Our brothers from Sencata, also from Sacaba, have been massacred. We are asking for justice, that true justice be done.
There have been warnings about the threats of far-right sectors to relaunch the political destabilization that preceded the November 2019 coup.
Once again, they are trying to stage a coup. We are against the coup that Fernando Camacho wants to undertake, and the Bolivian people are on alert and in a state of emergency. We will not allow any more abuses.
After the march through the city center, an assembly was held in the San Francisco area.
I am from Sencata. My brothers and I have been tortured. I was in prison for 3 weeks without seeing my family. I had no food, I had nothing. I had pleaded with them to give me some food. They didn't even want to give us water. That's what it was like in the cells.
And decisions were also taken in the face of threats from far-right sectors.
In the face of the coup attempt, we must declare ourselves in an emergency. In order to defend the democracy that we have achieved in the elections, we have to defend the administration of our president, Luis Arce Catacora.
We declare state of emergency and permanent resistance to the transnational right, junkie imperialism, and right-wing operators who are retreating in Santa Cruz. Second, the grassroots organizational and civil society structures of the 9 departments are instructed to immediately call for expanded councils, forums, meetings, assemblies to raise awareness, evaluate and strengthen the organizations.
A lawsuit against the alleged key actors in the November 2019 coup led to the pre-trial detention of former de facto president Janine Áñez, 2 of her former ministers, and 3 former military chiefs, while 8 other civilians and police have arrest warrants issued against them.
Freddy Morales, TeleSUR, Bolivia.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. Mass vaccination against the coronavirus in Cuba is scheduled to begin in June with Soberana 02, the first vaccine produced and developed in Latin America.
We will be completing, starting August, an average of practically 6 million people vaccinated.
This Wednesday, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez praised the country's progress in the immunization of the population against COVID-19 with the use of vaccine candidates Soberana 02 and Abdala. In his Twitter account, the head of state highlighted that thousands of Cubans are receiving doses of Soberana 02 and Abdala as part of the clinical trials underway, which opens up the way towards massive vaccination. Brazil's daily COVID-19 death toll soared past 3,000 for the first time on Tuesday as the country struggles to contain a surge of cases that has pushed hospitals to breaking point. The health ministry registered a record 3,251 deaths in 24 hours, bringing Brazil's overall death toll to nearly 299,000, second only to the United States. The latest bleak milestone came on the same day that President Jair Bolsonaro installed his 4th health minister on the pandemic, facing pressure to change track after downplaying the virus. Bolsonaro's first 2 health ministers, Drs. Luis Enrique Mandera and Nelson Teich, both fell out with the president over his defiance of expert advice on containing the virus. The Venezuelan vice president, who congratulated the rejection of the Brazilian Supreme Court of Jair Bolsonaro's request to lift the regional confinements, also insisted on the epidemiological threat represented by the South American giant.
So today we have positive news. We recall that a few days the president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, directly responsible for this crime against humanity, genocide against the people of Brazil, threatening and attacking the people of our region, and the variant of Brazil, is in 11 countries of our hemisphere Well, he asked that the Supreme Court of Brazil annul all decisions and policies against the COVID-19 issued by the governors. Today, the Supreme Court rejected Bolsonaro's solution to annul the confinement in Brazil.
The president of Uruguay, Luis Lacalle Pou, announced on Tuesday the closure of public offices and the total suspension of face-to-face classes, among other measures aimed at reducing mobility to stop the sharp escalation of COVID-19 contagions. The closure of all public offices with the exception of essential services, the suspension of public performances, the closure of gyms and free shops on the border, as well as the suspension of parties and social events in all cases until 12 April, were part of the announced package. Since the beginning of this month, Syria has registered a notable increase in daily cases of COVID-19. The Arab nation faces this situation in the midst of a Western economic blockade that prevents it from importing medical equipment and health supplies needed to cope with the pandemic. We have more details in the following report by our correspondent Hisham Wanus.
The number of COVID-19 cases has shot up and Damascus hospitals are full and unable to receive more patients. There are no empty beds in the intensive care units of the capital and a large number of those infected have been transferred to hospitals in other provinces.
This is the biggest outbreak and the situation is extremely dangerous in medical facilities, and this is largely due to the lack of implementation of preventive measures, especially because people hardly use face masks and do not respect social distancing.
Faced with this situation, the health authorities urge full compliance with preventive measures. Meanwhile, civil society supports the official action against the pandemic, with initiatives that offer patients medical oxygen cylinders, respiratory equipment, and free medical advice by medical volunteers in their own homes.
We offer medical assistance in homes through volunteer doctors, with a total of 120 doctors in our association. Likewise, we have 250 medical oxygen cylinders and respiratory equipment, and thus Syrian civil society revives hope with the few resources it has.
The difficult economic situation in the country as a result of the war and blockade makes it very hard to impose a partial or total lockdown to limit the spread of the virus and hinders access to preventive materials. Meanwhile, Syrians hope that official moves will succeed in securing COVID-19 vaccines.
Doctors have already received the vaccine as they are on the front line, and despite the blockade, the Ministry of Health is doing everything possible to guarantee the vaccine to all citizens, and I hope it arrives soon and I can receive the necessary doses. Despite all the economic difficulties caused by the blockade, people prioritize the acquisition of masks, gloves, and vitamins necessary to raise their level of immunity, even when the solution lies in vaccination, as the spread of the virus does not stop, and the current outbreak of the pandemic shows that the situation is very serious.
On March 22, 2020, the first case of infection with COVID-19 was detected in Syria. 1 year later, the epidemic has reached its third and most serious peak and joins the long list of challenges that have plagued the lives of Syrians for the past 10 years. The Syrian people are caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, the novel coronavirus, and on the other, the Western blockade and terrorist war, a situation in which Damascus demands an immediate lifting of European and US sanctions which obstruct its actions against the pandemic and endanger the lives of Syrians.
Hisham Wanus, TeleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In Myanmar, over 600 people imprisoned for protesting last month's military takeover were released on Wednesday. It's the first apparent gesture by the military to try to calm the demonstrations. Witnesses outside Insane Prison in Yangon saw a bus transported mostly young people, with some flashing the three-finger gesture of defiance adopted by protesters. The prisoners appeared to be the hundreds of students detained in early March while demonstrating against the February 1st takeover that removed Myanmar's elected government. On Wednesday, a giant container ship that ran aground in the Suez Canal had been partially refloated, and traffic is expected to resume soon. The incident brought marine traffic to a halt along one of the world's busiest trade routes. According to shipping company GAC and shipping data of Relative Aecon, the 200,000-ton vessel en route from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean ran aground at about 8 a.m. local time on Tuesday, after the ship suffered a blackout. GAC also said that 30 other ships in the northbound convoy behind the vessel were detained, waiting for the canal to be cleared. The Suez Canal is one of the world's most important trade routes, and about 10% of all international maritime trade travels through it. On Wednesday, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met his South Korean counterpart Shun Eui-yong in Seoul. Both ministers took part in the inauguration ceremony of the 2020-21 Year of Mutual Exchange between the Republic of Korea and Russian Federation. The ceremony celebrates the 30th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Korea and Russia. During the ceremony, Lavrov hailed the bilateral relations between Russia and South Korea.
I note with pleasure that we have come a long way in a short historic period. We have good neighborly relations, based on common interests and distinguishing by the high level of the mutual respect and credibility. Among key directions of mutual efforts is the realization of big projects, first in Siberia and in Russia's Far East, actively using benefits created for the foreign business within the free port of Vladivostok.
In Dakar, Senegal, journalists have experienced intimidation and threats since opposition leader Ousmane Sonko was detained for several days earlier this month. Media rights groups have accused the government of clamping down on the press to quash the protest, while journalists are also under fire from Sonko supporters, especially after interviews in which a Massius accused him of rape in early February. The situation got worse after the detention of the opposition leader, sparking unrest unseen for years in a country usually considered of a beacon of stability in the volatile West African region. According to a top Senegalese journalist, intimidation by an opposition party or its supporters is something new, because threats used to be subtler or mere intellectual diatribes. In such a toxic climate, many are reluctant to weigh in. President of the United States, Joe Biden, called for a ban on assault weapons on Tuesday after the country's second mass shooting in a week left 10 people dead in Colorado. Addressing a nation long traumatized by gun massacres in schools, nightclubs, movie theaters, and many other public spaces, the president spoke hours after a 21-year-old man was charged with shooting 10 people in a supermarket in Boulder, Colorado. Biden also stated that gun control is not should not be a partisan issue. The latest massacre came less than a week after another gunman shot 8 people dead at multiple spas in Atlanta, shedding light on attacks against the Asian American community.
You can close the loopholes in our background check system, including the Charleston loophole. That's one of the best tools we have right now to prevent gun violence. The Senate should immediately pass, let me say it again, the United States Senate, I hope some are listening, should immediately pass the 2 House-passed bills that close loopholes in the background check system.
The people of Syria have denounced that United States troops continued to loot oil from their territory. Local residents reported that U.S. troops transferred 300 tank trucks to oil to Iraq. They assured that the convoy set off from the oil fields of Siwideh in Syria's northeastern Hasakah province and crossed into the neighboring country through the illegal border crossing in Mahmoudiyah. In the last few months, U.S. soldiers have repeated this operation several times, depriving the country of its natural resources such as oil and wheat. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has sent a letter to his Pakistani counterpart saying he desires cordial relations with Pakistan, as relations seem to thaw between the two nuclear-armed neighbors. Modi wrote to Prime Minister Imran Khan on Tuesday to congratulate him on the country's annual Pakistan Day, which commemorates a resolution passed on March 23, 1940, when the subcontinent was under British colonial rule. The message from Modi follows a series of moves and statements signaling rapprochement, as the two sides are currently holding talks on sharing Indus River water in New Delhi. Last month, the militaries of both countries released a rare joint statement announcing a ceasefire along a disputed border in Kashmir, having exchanged fire hundreds of times in recent months. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.